from around the down of the 16th century to the 19th century, the Americas were colonized by various European powers, primarily the English, Spanish, French, Dutch, and the Portuguese. The European colonization rapidly transformed the face of the Americas, be it demographic changes, cultural, economic, etc., and was a key point in the rise of the West. The European colonizers got wealthy off their colonies and they had massive effects on those nations. With so many focus on the primary colonizers, some other colonizers also get forgotten. Several other nations also participated in the colonization of the Americas, such as Brandenburg, Prussia, Sweden, Poland, Lithuania, Denmark, Norway, Knights of Hospitaller, Tuscany, Anu, the German Westphal banking family, and of course, the subject of this video, the Scottish. The Scottish had several colonies in the Americas, such as Nova Scotia, New Jersey, and the Carolinas. The most famous Scottish colony in the Americas was the Darien colony. During the final years of the 17th century, the Scottish Parliament granted the rights to William Paterson, a founder of the Bank of England. He established a colony in what was called the Darien. So, what was the ultimate fate of this colony and what were its effects? We'll explore this in this video. There had been previous attempts by the Scottish to settle the Americas. In 1621, King James VI, or if you're English, James I, granted a charter to establish a colony in Nova Scotia, which means New Scotland in Latin. There are also colonies in eastern New Jersey and a settlement dubbed Stewart Sound in Carolina. However, the Darien colony is by far the most famous Scottish colony in the Americas. So, why did they attempt to settle the Darien colony? One word: trade. The Darien is located in the Isthmus of Panama, which is flanked by the Atlantic and Pacific. William Paterson, an evangelist for foreign trading schemes, knew the strategic importance of the region. In those days, trade with the lucrative eastern markets of Asia was very risky, costly, and time-consuming, as one had to sail around the Cape of Good Hope, and there was no Suez Canal at the time, and thus months were added onto the journey, and there was a high chance of being lost at sea. He wanted to establish a colony to ferry goods between the Atlantic and Pacific. The wealth from this link between the Pacific and Atlantic would aid Scotland economically. And now I'm going to get some comments asking about how Spain controlled most of Panama, and that trade between the Atlantic and Pacific was already occurring. However, the Spanish were very much not interested in global trade. The Iberian merchant class was practically a joke, since before Columbus, Iberia was an economic dependency of Northern Europe. The Spanish never reinvested their wealth in their colonies, but rather spent them on superfluous luxury for the elite. The primary center of colonial Panama was in the center of the colony, and so establishing the colony in Darien is not as bad of an idea as one may think. Paterson requested the Scottish Parliament grant him a charter to colonize the Darien. On June 12, 1695, he presented a draft for such an act that would grant him the charter to colonies in the Darien. On June 26, the Scottish Parliament granted him the charter, establishing the Company of Scotland trading to Africa and the Indies. The idea of establishing a colony in the Darien was very appealing to the Scottish Parliament. Scotland in this era was undergoing a period of economic downturn, famine, and general decline of what was known as the ill times. England's wars on the continent had drained the economy, and poor harvests in the 1690s had caused a massive famine that wiped out between 5 to 15% of the Scottish population. And there was a massive movement to the cities who were in no way prepared for all the massive influx of people. And thus homelessness and starvation was rampant. Scottish industry was in decline while revolt tore the country apart. The government was left broke, and the people were ruined and mired in poverty. Thus, the idea of establishing a trade colony in the Darien, where trade could be ferried between the two great oceans of the world, was very appealing. Many saw the economic opportunity and flocked to invest. The amount raised for this project is truly astounding. Modern estimates state that upwards of £500,000, or what is the equivalent of $140 million today, about 2.35 times the annual exports, or putting a fifth and half of Scottish capital at the time, was invested into this project. The amount of investment into the company has often been attributed to desperation and optimism. However, Scottish national pride also played a major role. A colony in the Darien would bolster Scotland's position on the globe, and thus bolstering Scottish independence from the detested English. Encouraged by the public support of the colony, the names of those who invested were published, furthering investment. The money invested was used to construct several new ships that would ferry men and supplies to the colony. Paterson had learned of the Darien through Lionel Walker, a sailor he met while he was in London, who told him that the Darien was a land populated by friendly natives, rich and fertile, and was a general paradise. Paterson used Walker's claim to draw in the potential settlers. In July of 1698, five vessels carrying some 1,200 people, commanded by Captain Robert Pennacook, departed Leith Harbour and set sail for the Darien. The actual destination that they were traveling to was a closely guarded secret, much to the suspicion of many of the more informed passengers. On November 4th, 1698, the expedition disembarked in the Darien. The settlers proceeded to fortify the area, erecting Fort St. Andrew. A proclamation was issued declaring freedom of religion and trade, and negotiations with the natives to purchase land commenced. The news reached Scotland of their arrival, which was widely celebrated. This land, which they dubbed New Caledonia, was the capital of New Edinburgh, was not what they thought it would be like. What was thought to be a fertile land was in reality a mosquito-infested swamp. Agriculture was nearly impossible, and the natives refused to trade with the colonists. Numerous became sick, and power struggles between the elected officials weakened local leadership. Scarcity of food and rumored Spanish incursions made the situation dire. The natives took pity on the Scottish, gifting them fruit and fish. 400 colonists ultimately perished, bringing the total number of colonists down to 730 people. William III, King of England, as well as also stadtholder of the Netherlands, forbade trade between the various English settlements and the Scottish Darien. 10 people a day were expiring. Spring of 1699 brought torrential rain, and relief ships never arrived. Roger Oswald, a Scottish colonist dwelling in the colony, wrote of the hardships faced in the colonies. The harrowing account stated that they lived on less than a pound of moldy flour, infested with enormous maggots and worms weekly. On boiled to little water, without anything else, big maggots and worms would be skimmed off the top. In short, a man might have easily destroyed his whole week's ration in one day, and have but one ordinary stomach neither. Yet, for all this short allowance, every man that would never be so weak, daily turned out to work by daylight, whether with the hatchet, the wheelbarrow, pickaxe, shovel, forehammer, or any other instrument in the case required, and so continued until 12 o'clock, and that too again, and stayed to night, sometimes working all day up to the headbands of the breaches in the water at the trenches. My shoulders had been so wore with carrying burdens that the skin has come off them and grew full of boils. If a man was sick and obligated to stay within, no victuals for them that day. Our councillors all the while riding to ease, sometimes divided into factions, and being swayed by particular interest, ruined by the public. Our bodies pined away and grew so macerated with such allowance that they were like so many skeletons. With the rather optimistic dreams of the colonists quickly perishing under harsh realities of the life in the Darien, the colony was eventually abandoned. Four ships departed sailing for Scotland. When they arrived in Scotland, only 300 people and one vessel remained. The few ships that returned to Scotland while the colony was still alive primarily came with good news, masquerading the harsh realities of life in New Caledonia. As such, while the New Caledonian colony was swiftly collapsing, another expedition was being planned. Four vessels departed Westgate Bay, carrying 1,200 people, in August of 1699. 60 people died during the voyage. They docked at the English colony of Montserrat, but were denied access to the supplies due to prohibition of trade between the Scots and English. Those aboard the vessels ferrying them to Panama were blissfully ignorant of the failure of the original colony, and were thus prepared to arrive at an already pre-existing colony. They were in shock when they arrived at the abandoned colony. They began the process of rebuilding it. Soon after their arrival, Spanish sailed into the harbor and blockaded the settlement. Witnessing the precarious situation the Scottish were in, with only 300 colonists being fit for duty and a death rate of 16 per day, the Spanish offered them conditions of surrender, offering them a voyage back to Scotland. The colonists reluctantly accepted. However, this was not the end of the misfortune. People broke on board. One ship leaked and had to dock in Cartagena, another ship wrecked by Jamaica, and another was lost off the coast of Charleston with 140 passengers. 250 more perished due to disease. Estimates on how many returned to Scotland are unknown, some places as low as 30. The failure of the Scottish colonies had a massive emotional, political, and economic shockwaves throughout the Kingdom of Scotland. Scottish morale took a massive, incalculable hit, and the few settlers who returned were viewed as pariahs in the country. Patterson went bankrupt and frivolously attempted to defend himself as the weight of the losses of the colony loomed upon him. Only Camp Faunab appears to be honored following the disaster, being awarded the Tobogante Medal for his role in the debacle, for ironically blaming the failures of the colony on the company. With upwards of half the economy being invested into the Darien Scheme, the failure caused a massive recession on par with that of the Great Depression in the United States. This basically destroyed Scotland and left it weak for several years. The losses from the Darien Scheme ultimately led to the 1707 Acts of Union, where England and Scotland unified to establish the Kingdom of Great Britain. The English had bribed the Scottish nobility into offering compensation for the losses from the Darien Scheme if they had accepted the Union. In all honesty, the Acts of Union could have only really occurred with the failures of the Darien, with most scholars opposing unification heavily. A serious misconception that many have with the Scottish colony was that it was doomed to fail from the start. From the surface, this looks like an entirely reasonable point to make. I mean, the chances of a swamp-infested colony, based on incursions from the other powers in the region, surviving is pretty low. However, the history of colonization says otherwise. Look at Jamestown, which experienced very similar hardships to those experienced in New Caledonia, and it managed to survive for decades. Sure, it did eventually get abandoned in the mid-1670s, but by then they were able to serve as a launchpad for further English settlement in the modern-day United States. Spanish colonies also experienced similar conditions, especially in this region. So, what actually caused the death blow to the Darien? The overt sabotage by the English. King William III's order to not trade with the colony deprived the colony of much-needed supplies. The Scottish could have easily escaped the with all disease, death, etc. They could have relied on relief ships to supply them and keep the colony alive. Then the English forbid trade with the colonies, and all of a sudden, resources went scarce. If the English had never sabotaged the Scottish colonial efforts in the Darien, the Scottish could have easily scraped by and formed a colony in New Caledonia. This begs the question, what if New Caledonia survived? How would that affect history, and what would the world look like today? Stay tuned for What If the Darien Colony Never Died Out, coming up soon. Thank you for watching. Consider liking and sharing this video, and subscribing if you haven't. If you did like this video, you may like my video on the Viking colony of Vinland. As always, thank you for watching and have a great day.